Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be making a recipe that is near and dear to my heart with one of my favorite American girls, Addy. And Addy started out her story in North Carolina as an enslaved child and ended her story in Pennsylvania as a freed child. And we're going to learn a little bit about her story as we go, but follow along. So this recipe is for shortbread, and it's a really basic recipe. It doesn't have any leavening in it, so no baking soda, no baking powder. It doesn't have any eggs. It's just flour, butter, and some brown sugar. And I'm going to teach you guys the proper way to measure flour. To do that, you're going to scoop your flour into the measuring cup, and then you want to level it across with a knife to make sure you have the right amount. And we are going to be sifting the flour in this case. You don't necessarily need to sift flour in all cases, but during that time period, it would have been important to sift flour because it was ground, not as fine as it is now, and so it would have been important to sift it to make sure that you got out any larger pieces. And also, to be quite honest, you might have had to have sifted out any bugs that had gotten into it just to make sure that you're not eating those. And so it's important to sift flour during that time period. So we're going to start out by sifting your flour. You can also use a strainer if you don't have a regular sifter. I'm just using the sifter because I have it. And you're also going to add a little bit of salt into the flour, and that's just to enhance the flavor a little bit. And you don't want to measure over top of the flour because then you might pour in too much of it. You want to scoop it up out of your container or pour it over top of a different container, and then level off that salt so that you make sure that you have the right amount. Salt can get very overwhelming in a sweet recipe, so you want to make sure you have the right amount. And then you're just going to sift the flour into the bowl. And I am using a wooden bowl, which would have been pretty common during that time period, and a wooden spoon just to try to make sure that I'm keeping all of the materials as accurate as I can. I also have out one of the things that I have from being younger, the Addy doll I got as an adult, but I had the spider, the little pot that you see at her feet. I had that when I was a kid just because I was always interested in cooking as a kid, and so that actually is something that I had when I was younger. So with the brown sugar, you want to pack that into your bowl and press it down in there, or into your measuring spoon as hard as you can, and then measure that in there, and then you're going to mix up your flour and brown sugar and salt. And I just find it easier to do this with my fingers, and also it's more fun that way. So the next thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to cut in the butter. And so the easiest way to start this out is going to be to cut the butter into little pats into your flour, sugar, salt mixture. And this is going to make it a little bit easier to mix it in. I cut it as thin as I possibly can. The other thing you can do to make this quicker, if you're just trying to make it fast and not necessarily stay historically accurate, is to grate the butter into there, and that'll make this process a lot faster. You do want your butter to be cold, and so that will help you out a whole lot. So the next step is going to be to work all of this butter into the flour, and you can do this a couple of different ways. The first thing I like to do is always just kind of toss the butter into the flour just so that all those pieces are coated. And the cookbook recommends a pastry cutter or a pastry blender. I don't have one of those at my house just because they annoy me because they pretty much only do one thing. You can use a fork to do this process, but it's going to take a while, and it's going to kind of annoy the poop out of you, to be honest. Just going through and having to use the fork to break all of this up. And in reality, the easiest way to do this is going to be to work with your hands. It works a little bit better if you have cold hands because you're not looking to melt the butter in this process. You're looking to basically have the flour be between, like kind of coated with pieces of flour. So you're just like working it in over that process. So as we are working through this process of working the sugar, flour, and butter mixtures together, Addy is, I feel like, one of the, if not the most important American Girl story that we have. And the reason for that is that Addy started out as an enslaved child, and she was an enslaved child who actually worked. And I remember being a young girl when Addy and her books came out, and reading her books and reading about her being in the tobacco fields for the person that owned her, and the overseer coming behind her as she was removing tobacco worms from the tobacco leaves, and she missed one, and the overseer forced her as a child to eat one of them. Now keep in mind that the American Girl books were written about 9-year-olds, and they turned 10 in the Happy Birthday books, but she had not hit that 10-year-old mark yet. So it's really important to understand that when we talk about enslaved persons, we are also talking about enslaved children. And I think that as a child, that really, really impacted who I was as a person, to understand that somebody that was my age, and actually Addy came out when I was a little bit older than she was, that a child could actually be enslaved and be forced to work when she should have been going to school and learning and playing with her friends and doing the same things that I was doing, and that she had the right to do those things. And so these stories are so important to be told, because even though the American Girl books are fictional, there were American girls in this country, on this land, that had stories very similar to this. And Addy and her mother were able to escape, and her father was able to follow along not too long afterwards. But for so many people, it was a while before they were able to live a life as freed people, and even much longer before they had full rights. And so it's important for us to read these stories and share them, and not just have dolls that are of today, but to read the stories that formed this country, and understand that not every little girl was going to school and playing with their friends and doing those things. So as you can see from working that in, it's starting to get kind of crumbly, and the mixture is kind of balling up, and that means it's starting to come together, and we're just about there. And once you get it to where it'll kind of form together into a ball, we're almost to the point that we can get it into the pan. And there's a whole lot of butter in this, so you're not going to have to grease your pan, but this is kind of what we're looking for, is that your bowl is going to be fairly clean, and we're not going to have very much left behind. So once it all comes together and it looks pretty uniform, you want to make sure that there's not any chunks of butter in there, because that's going to make your final product kind of uneven. But this is the point that you're going to put it into your pan. So I am using a 9x9 glass dish. That's generally about the size that you want to look for, but you want to press it into the pan, get it as even as possible, and get it all the way into the corners. We don't have to grease the dish because there's so much butter in this, it will kind of grease itself. But that is generally what you're looking for, is just kind of getting it pressed all the way into those corners and flattened out. And then what I did was I took the spoon and smoothed it out so that it just looked prettier. And I just don't like having fingerprints in the top of stuff, just because it makes it obvious that I've had fingers all over something. And it's going into a 350-degree oven, so it's not like anything that's on there is not going to get cooked out of it. And I washed my hands really well beforehand, but still, we're going to smooth the top out with a wooden spoon, and you're going to bake it at 350 for about 20 minutes. Even though this recipe is super simple, don't mistake it for something that doesn't taste good. This tasted amazing. We kept on sneaking back over to the kitchen to grab other bites, so I strongly recommend you try this out. If you do, let us know in the comments below, and try to find Addy's cookbook on eBay or in the library or somewhere. It will definitely enrich your life. Read the stories that are in this cookbook. There are so many interesting things in the cookbook itself that will teach you more about what life in that time period was like, and these things are just so important to know and understand. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll have more stories coming up.